Katie. How's it going?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. Are you ready to begin the session?
Yeah, can you set the stage for me?
Sure. Today's session is a Join My Podcast session with Bob. The session begins as if you've met at the bar at a conference. When Bob shows up, you can start the simulation by saying, "So, what do you think about joining me on the podcast? Do you have any more questions before we start?"
No, that's great. Thanks. Goodbye.
Great. Let's get started.
Hi, Bob. How's it going?
Hi there. It's going well. Thanks. How about you?
Going well, my friend. How's Q4 shaping up for you?
Q4 is always a busy time, but we're focused and pushing hard to hit our targets. How about you?
Yeah, busy as well. And listen, I know you have a ton going on, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I was wondering if you wanted to join me as a guest on the GTM podcast.
I appreciate the invitation. I already have my own direct audience on LinkedIn, and I'm really selective on which podcast to join. Why should I come on the GTM podcast?
Yeah, totally. I get it. A lot of our guests like how focused our audience is. We speak specifically to revenue leaders and early stage founders. And currently we have around 30,000 monthly downloads, and it's growing every month. I recently found out we're actually a top 1% podcast globally, which is pretty cool for a niche podcast. And most of our guests see a pretty big uptick in their social following. It's helped them acquire customers, form new partnerships, help them hire or even get hired. And we've had a few even become advisors to some really cool startups.
That sounds impressive. However, I'm super busy and focused on hitting our Q4 number right now. I'm not sure if I have the time to prep, record, and review an episode.
Yeah, I hear you. Most of our guests are definitely really busy people, and we like to do as much of the heavy lifting on our side as possible. We have a great VP of marketing, Sophie, who can send over all the details along with a quick type form that should take you less than, really 15 minutes to fill out. And for ultra busy guests, that's usually enough to have a pretty compelling conversation. And then there's others who like to have a prep call or two beforehand, but it's totally up to you.
That helps to know. But I've listened to a few episodes and people share pretty intimate stories from their careers. I'm worried that my company, Tech Growth Solutions, will feel uncomfortable with me sharing all of the tactics and strategies that are working for us right now.
Yeah, that's a fair call out. I mean, it's always a bit of a balance. We do try to get into the finer details whenever possible because, those little details and numbers can be really valuable to listeners, but only to a level that our guests feel comfortable with, of course. We would never publish anything that you did not, approve of. We keep it as real and raw as we can, but there have been cases where maybe a name or a number was dropped that afterwards we redacted. We can handle that all in post-production.
That makes sense. Thanks for addressing my concerns. I'll think about it and get back to you if I decide to move forward.
Yeah, sounds good. Do you by chance have any time next Thursday? My afternoon is pretty open.
I appreciate the offer, but I don't think I can commit to another meeting right now. Thanks for understanding.
I feel you. Well, whenever you're ready, you'd certainly be in good company. We've had the CEO of GitHub, Apollo, and Procore on. So hopefully, maybe in the new year, we'll make it happen.
I appreciate that. I'll keep it in mind. Thanks for reaching out and understanding my situation.
Thanks, Bob. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Take care.
Welcome back. Give me a moment to review your session. You did well in several areas, especially in explaining the podcast's value proposition and addressing concerns about content control. However, you could improve on addressing time and effort concerns more effectively. When the prospect mentioned their busy schedule, you could have emphasized the minimal time commitment more clearly and reassured them about the ease of preparation. For example, you might say, "I understand you're busy. Most of our guests find that the preparation takes less than 15 minutes, and we handle all the heavy lifting. Recording typically takes just an hour, and we can work around your schedule."
That's great advice, Katie.
Glad you found it helpful. If you need more feedback or have any other questions, feel free to ask.
Perfect. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Keep practicing and good luck with your future sales conversations.
Behind the scenes, It was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
Hello, go-to-market leaders. If you're like me, you're probably feeling the AI FOMO. You're certainly not alone. And that's why HG Insights created the next generation of sales AI report to calm the FOMO and help you bring AI to your go-to-market teams. It includes a breakdown of the sales AI landscape, the adoption of Gen AI and sales software across different buyer groups, plus an analysis of the top 75 trending sales AI tools. And why HG Insights? Pretty simple. They've been writing market reports for years as the pioneer of tech adoption and market insights. And they are trusted by go-to-market leaders at the likes of Snowflake, Five9, Google Cloud to help improve go-to-market efficiency. So if you're thinking about AI for your sales team but unsure where to start, this free and ungated report has got you covered. Check out the link in the show notes. Now on with the show. All right. Well, now that I just got turned down by my AI avatar guest that I was really, really hoping to have on the pod today, I guess I'm stuck with you, David. How's it going? How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I appreciate you letting a product guy like me hang with the GTM cool kids.
Of course, and I'm just kidding. We're incredibly, incredibly excited to be chatting with you today. And for the listeners, David is the co-founder and CEO of Avarra, who built the AI avatar that you just heard me interact with. That shot me down and will not be coming on the pod, unfortunately. But he's also an incredible product leader. So prior to starting this company, had over 30 years of experience and back-to-back runs from around 50 to 60 million, all the way to 1 billion, 2 billion plus in revenue at incredible companies like WebEx and Proofpoint. And we're going to spend some time today talking through sort of the intertwined nature of product and go-to-market. I think it's a really important discussion to have. But before we get there, let's talk about these avatars and these simulations. I know as we were prepping for the podcast, I got to interact with it in a few different scenarios. And ultimately, we thought in this case, it would be funny if it shot me down. And earlier this week, I tried to pitch it on Avarra, and I didn't quite nail this one specific objection, which was a security question. And so I didn't get the next meeting. And what I found was super interesting is I had this innate competitive desire to go back and do another live simulation. Like we were just prepping. I was like, I want to do another one. I want to get it right this time. And although we're investors, I don't technically work at Avarra, but I found it just a very different experience than a lot of the training I've had in the past. And maybe I'm a weirdo, but it was genuinely kind of fun. Can you tell folks a little bit about how it works? Because this thing's not just giving me canned answers.
Right. Well, that's the key. What we're trying to do is build a simulated environment that replicates that experience, literally the experience, how you feel when you're talking to a customer or prospect. Because that's where experiential learning comes in. It's like learning to play a musical instrument or playing a sport. You don't learn how to play guitar by watching some YouTube videos, reading a book, and then practicing a couple times. You actually have to experience it, similar if you're playing a sport, golf, or anything else. And it's never been possible before large language models and 3D avatars to be able to simulate human-to-human interactions. We've got lots of simulations for processes, whether you're designing a plane or a Formula One car, or for people to machine, like learning to fly a plane. But we've never before been able to simulate people-to-people interactions. So that's what we're building at Avarra, and we think we're going to get the same kinds of cycle time and cost improvements in terms of how quickly you can learn by simulating these kinds of interactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's it's been happening across other industries for many years now. I know, you recently shared an example with me that really kind of hammered it home for me is that, when you're learning to fly a plane, the first time that you fly a plane is with like 300 passengers in the back, which is crazy.
I was flying back from Philadelphia on a wide body Airbus, and the pilot was sitting next to me, deadheading back because his plane had a mechanical. And I'm a bit of an aviation buff, so I was chatting him up about the plane, et cetera. And he told me that he'd flown Boeing his whole career, and he just switched over to this Airbus. And he had done all of his certification on this plane in a simulator. And the first time he flew the physical article was with a plane full of people. And I was like, whoa, that, that's kind of scary. And he's like, no, you shouldn't be worried. I'm better trained because I get more hours through more situations than I ever could in the physical airplane. Like you can't practice an engine fire in the actual plane, but they can in the simulator. And so from his perspective, he felt better trained and he could do ongoing refresher training more frequently than he used to be able to early in his career. And from the airline's perspective, well, it costs them a fraction of the amount and time, but they're also generating revenue from that pilot's very first flight in the physical airplane. And now we're trying to provide that same kind of efficiency for sales teams. What if your sales reps could actually be legitimately selling and generating revenue, not just practicing on their very first prospect?
Yeah. It's huge, and I think anyone who's been in a revenue leadership role or is an AE knows the power of role playing. We've all done role playing for a long time, and unfortunately, it's one of those things that often gets missed. It's on like the Friday afternoon. We'll do some role playing, and then life gets busy, and it doesn't always happen. And it also requires whoever is doing the role play to be informed on all of these different sets of buyers, all these new products, all these new features, or else you're kind of just going through the same similar motions. And this allows you to simulate, hundreds of different interactions that you could potentially have with a buyer.
Oh, no question. And it's also just way less awkward. I mean, the whole role play thing you're doing with your peers or your boss, it's just uncomfortable, right? Because
Yeah.
and then the boss doesn't want to be the super, you know, hard ass customer because they're trying to like build a rapport with this new rep or SE. So the whole thing is just it's effective, but people don't do it as enough because it doesn't scale. It's not much fun. And there's always something interfering, right? And so this lets you do that and in a much more realistic way because we can create all these personas with all these different characteristics and be more realistic than what that manager or peer would be because we can train them based on what customers are saying in live meetings from web meeting transcripts, right? So we know that it's accurate to what's currently going on in the field because it's trained on what real customers are saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And fun is a key word there. We don't always think of fun when we think of driving revenue. We have this hard number we have to hit. But, I think of like sports. Training was always more fun when you go and you're kicking around the soccer ball by yourself, learning things on your own versus like sometimes those very intense. Your coach is watching you, you have to perform. You have this ability to be like more creative, make mistakes, um and in that environment, I think is a perfect environment for growth when you can make mistakes in sort of a comfortable environment.
No question. And like you said, it's a lot more fun to talk to these avatars when you don't get the meeting. Like you want to try it again, right? Um, and that creates the gets the natural competitive juices going that most top sales folks have. Uh, it's a little bit like gambling in that every situation's a little different, right? And so you want that positive feedback. You just want to do it again, right? And that's totally different than you know listening to your required onboarding video. Right? It's just it's a different experience.
Totally, totally. And I think to me this feels like the future of sales training and enablement. But as soon as I had my first interaction with one of these simulations, my brain goes a million different directions. And I won't put you on the spot too much here, but for me, I was like, wow, I would also like this for like executive briefing conversations. I'm about to have a really important meeting with my boss, or I remember in the outreach days, I was kind of managing our relationship with a board member who was the chairman of AT&T, and I felt like I had to be so buttoned up every time I interacted with him. And it feels like there's almost endless use cases for this once you start really thinking about it.
Oh, no question. And we're building this as a generic platform. At some point, if we want to, we can talk a little bit about how the tech all works, but how we're building simulations and how we're training the AI to take the role of a particular participant in a meeting is not specific to sales at all. And every time someone uses this, they've got their next use case that they want to go use. And a big part of my job as CEO today, and we'll talk a little bit about this when we talk about advice for founders, is saying no to all that, right? Uh, because there's so many places we could take it. Right now, we need to be focused on solving a problem for a known buyer where it's high value. They have a propensity to spend money, and prove that we can deliver amazing results there. And like you said, this platform can go lots of different ways, whether it is hiring, firing, raise conversations, performance conversations, prepping for interviews, customer success managers, the list implementation people, the list just goes on in terms of all of the places where simulating human to human interactions could be super high value.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, how did a product guy like you end up founding a company that's initially at least focused on sales professionals and helping the sales profession?
Yeah, because it's a problem I lived. You mentioned in the very generous intro. Thank you. My back-to-back runs of scaling companies from tens of millions in annual recurring revenue to billions. And to do that, like you got to get everybody rowing in the same direction, right? A lot of people have to contribute and be on the same page if that's going to happen. And the biggest thing you've got to do is have a repeatable, scalable go-to-market motion. And in both of those cases, we had to develop a new one midstream in order to drive that next level of growth. And I saw just how difficult it was to um, to do that across hundreds or thousands of sellers. And so it was a problem that I knew. And then I combined that with some insights around AI when we were getting started. Um, I first had this idea 2 or 3 years ago, well before GPT came out, but I didn't think the AI models were there yet, and they weren't. And then all of a sudden, we got this huge leap forward in the AI models. And one of the things I was really looking for as a technologist was everybody was fretting over the fact that these large language models could create reams of seemingly realistic fake data. And they were talking about what a problem that was. And it is indeed a problem in many areas, but it's also a feature. Like, oh, you mean I can create realistic stuff at scale? And we looked at a lot of different applications where that might be useful, like creating test data for a QA environment, or in security, where I had come from previously, creating deception, fake companies to lure in honeypots, lure in bad guys, right? Um, but this problem was more general purpose, as we just talked about, more pain, um, and and quite frankly, more fun because we were, creating true human to human interaction for the first time. And so that's how we ended up here.
Yeah. I want to follow that thread a little bit. So again, you're a product guy. A lot of our guests here are go-to-market leaders, but you said something super interesting when we were doing some prep for this. And you said, I design products from the go-to-market motion backwards. What does that mean to you?
Well, it means that, well, first of all, any product person, whether they be come from the product management side or the development side, worth their salt, wants their product to get used. Who wants to spend years building something and never gets used? Well, if it's going to get used, it's got to get sold. And so, selfishly, in addition to all the business reasons and economic reasons, if you're an inventor and you want your product to have an impact, well, you better figure out how to sell it. And it's really hard to retrofit that later. So what I try and do is figure out what the buyer journey is. How's someone going to buy this product? And then you have to build the product to support that buyer's journey. And this has become pretty well known in product-led sales or product-led growth, where you design the product so that it'll sell itself. But it's absolutely true of even traditional B2B enterprise sales. If you think through at each step, I've got a first meeting. Well, what do I need to show them in that meeting that's going to get me to the second meeting? At Proofpoint, we were selling this amazing threat dashboard, and we had unique insights that no one had ever seen before. But how do you show somebody it's different in that first meeting? Well, we decided we actually needed to invest development dollars to create the ability to completely anonymize live customer threats that were coming in that day. So in that first meeting, I could show customers a threat that had just hit one of their peer companies that day and the information that we provided for it in a completely anonymized way. And I took development resources away from customer-facing things to build what was effectively a demo feature, because that was how I got out of the first meeting, right? And subsequently, you have to do that at every step in the buyer's journey. Okay, I've got a 6-week trial, POC as part of my process. Well, what am I showing at the end of that? Well, you might have to build features into the product to do that. Or sometimes it's even simpler. At WebEx, it's a simple example, but it proves the point. In a web meeting, one of the features of a web meeting is what the host sees is different than what the attendees are seeing. You're probably sitting there right now with a bunch of controls that I don't see. Well, if I'm trying to sell web meetings over the web, well, how do I share that? So at WebEx, we had to build a feature that was only internal to let you share what you were seeing as a host when you were sharing your desktop, which would have normally been hidden because otherwise I couldn't sell the product over the web. So it's all these little things, and they're competing for resources with things that customers need. But if you do them right, they generate way more revenue, and you pour all that back into building the customer-facing feed.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, to bring that fully to life, wouldn't it be great if I was trying to sell you the Riverside platform right now, which we are doing this podcast on? I could basically flip the screen and you could see the noise reduction, echo cancellation, the share, the scripting features, all of that. And, those require a lot of, thoughtfulness above and beyond the product. You need to show it visually to the buyers. I guess, given this platform and lots of sales leadership and CROs, if you could speak directly to sales leadership, what is something you wish more revenue leaders knew about the product organization?
Well, I think a couple of things. One, what I just said, if you've got a good product leader, like they're as motivated as you are to get deals closed, because why would they want to work on stuff for years that didn't get used? Right. And so your interests are really well aligned if you can actually get down to that core, right? And then I think one of the areas that's often overlooked that sales leaders don't tap into enough from the product leaders is very, very many product leaders they don't know how to sell. They're not salespeople, but they often founded the company or took the role because they understand the pain of the buyer really, really well, because they had that pain at some point in their career, right? They frequently are solving a problem that they themselves have experienced. So one of the best things you can do is really mine that product leader for the pain. Because he who wins isn't the person who's got the best solution. It's the person who defines the pain the best. Because if you can convince the customer that you understand their pain, they're going to assume that your product solves that pain. And then your features are facts that support your understanding. Both they remember is that emotional view that, oh, they get me, they understand this problem. And so if you can tell that founder story and the stories of the pain and why they built that product, that can create the trust with your buyer that really can propel a sales cycle.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that line a lot. Whoever wins is the person who defines the pain the best. I would strongly agree with that
Oh, no.
statement. Yeah. Yeah. And so at your time at WebEx or Proofpoint, how did you actionably, what tactics did you implement that made sure that you were always aligned with sales leadership? Was it a weekly call? Was it were you texting them every day? What was kind of the cadence to make sure that there was that full transparency and everyone was rowing the boat in the right direction?
I think it's really simple. I help them win deals.
Yeah. If you do that, they'll pay attention.
They'll pay attention if you just engage and you're there in the trenches helping them win, right? Brainstorming, okay, this feature's not there. Well, how can we get around that? How, and sometimes that's on a first meeting. It's not always at the end, right? I used to tell my sales leaders all the time. We were in Proofpoint in particular, we were in a space where everybody was qualified. Everybody had the pain. Everybody had some solution. And we were trying to get ours in, replace somebody else's legacy thing. And so that first meeting was gold. Because usually a first meeting, I'm just trying to figure out, are you qualified? Do you have budget? Do you have this pain? Well, in our environment, that was all true. And so really, that first meeting, are they going to engage and take a deeper look? Or are they going to say, no, I'm good? That meant that if we had these really hard accounts to crack, sometimes bringing in the heavy hitter in a very first call was the right thing to do. And so I told my sales leaders all the time, if this is somebody you've been trying to get to forever and you finally got to them, bring me in on first call. If it turns out to be unqualified, no worries. Right. And that did a couple of things. That also gave me insight into not just the end of the sales cycle, but the beginning of the sales cycle, which helped things be aligned. The other thing I also did was made sure that I made myself available to the mid-market teams, because those deals didn't ever warrant my involvement on deal size alone. But if I didn't get involved with them, then I didn't have that knowledge or understanding of the dynamics there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, smart. I feel like, yeah, our SMB and mid-market customers don't often get access to, the various parts of our organization, and then that leaves this knowledge gap in parts of the organization internally. So I think that's really smart to make sure that you're close to all customer sets. Do you have a particular story? So we love stories on this podcast. A particular story in your career that stands out to you as being really impactful now looking back?
Yeah, I think one is when not to listen to your customers. Jensen at NVIDIA talks about, they came out with this product and it was priced at 2 or 3x and everybody told him no one was ever going to buy it, right? But he had conviction that the market was there and he wanted to do it. We had a similar situation at Proofpoint. When I joined Proofpoint, we were a very successful, super happy enterprise customers, high-end anti-spam solution. But we were only getting $10 a user a year. 67 million in revenue, growing 25%, kind of no man's land. And if we were going to get big, we were going to have to do something more strategic, get deal size up. And I came up with this concept of advanced email security, where we put, I won't go into the details, but we decided that this wasn't an anti-spam problem. It was a security problem. And we needed to go after the security buyer, not the messaging buyer. And 10 months in, I told the entire company that stop talking about spam. Like nobody cares. We're going to talk about threats. And this was a company that sold spam solutions. And And not everybody believed. I had one of our most senior SCs come up to me and say, we don't do that. I was like, yeah, I know, but we will. Um, but he made the transition. He got on board, right? And continued to be one of our most successful SCs for a really long time. But it wasn't just internal skepticism. I went to customers and I said, here's what we're going to build. And I was trying to get 30% uplift because I was just trying to get my deal size up. And they're like, no, I'm not going to pay for this. I pay you to stop this stuff already. Why should I pay you more for this advanced thing? Like, that should just be part of the product. I had Gartner tell me, oh, this not going to happen. No one's ever going to pay for it. I mean, literally the most senior analyst who's covered this space for decades. And I'd been in the business for a year. Like, I knew nothing about security. And I was like, no, this is different. I see the pain. Like, even though you say as a customer, you're not going to pay me for this, I know that you have no alternative. I know this is expensive. And I also know that no competitor is going to be able to provide it for free because I've got real cogs on the back end. I've got real costs to run this. So I don't care that no one says I can charge for it. We're going to charge for it because we have to and because there's value. And we didn't get 30%. I was off. We did not get a 30% uplift. We ended up getting 3x the price for this, 300, not 30, for this new capability. And the anti-spam kind of became an add-on to the advanced threat, not vice versa.
Yeah. First off, I love that story, and I love the conviction. I think that's what separates great leaders from good leaders and great founders from good founders. Is sometimes you have to put a stake in the ground. And I guess, have you learned like a framework? Because of course, like I know Avarra, you're listening to your customers constantly, and like that is a big part of identity as a product person, is like listen to the customers. When should bells go off in a founder's head, in a product leader's head, that maybe the customer is wrong?
Sure. I'll answer, and I want to answer one other important question for founders about listening to customers. The big thing is, what are you listening for? Always listen for pain. I talked about who defines the pain wins, but who also finds the pain wins. And so I never listen to what customers ask for because they're almost always wrong. If they were right, they'd be product people. And so what they're right about is their pain. You need to understand sort of how they work and what you can do to make their life better. And if you're listening for pain and asking good questions that are pain related and ignoring their answers or ignoring what they ask for, you're going to be a lot more successful because they're going to tend to ask for the obvious thing because they don't know what's possible. And if you're really trying to disrupt, it's what you're building, they aren't going to view as possible. Sometimes there's a really forward-thinking customer. And I don't want to paint this as a broad brush. I mean, there are lots of really smart people. And so good ideas come from anywhere. But in general, the actual feature suggestions are not going to be great. The pain is gold. And then the second thing is, I always tell new hire product managers, they can make two mistakes. They cannot listen to their customers, or they can listen to the wrong ones. And that's the other key thing, is you got to pay attention to who you're listening to. And the loudest customers who want to buy your products are not necessarily represent the center of the bullseye. I mean, lots of founders make this mistake, and they go to sell to somebody where there is no solution. And the reason there's no solution there is because it's not a very big market. And no one is servicing that market, and they're willing to talk to you as a little customer, as a little vendor, because the big guys don't want to bother. And so you need to be really careful that you are listening in a big enough market.
Yeah. Listening in a big enough market, and listening for the answer behind the answer. And, they'll think that this little feature or this little functionality would solve all my problems, but dive deeper into that problem. And maybe there's a complete reimagining of the solution to that pain that they're experiencing. I like that. And I mean, the proof is in the results. 300% lift. That must have been good. a good year for you. Was that WebEx or that was Proofpoint?
That's Proofpoint, yeah. And so we ended up creating a multi-billion-dollar product category that literally everybody in the industry has something similar to what we talked about. And we protected more than 100 million users with it. So back to my point about why do we do this? Well, that conviction, let's protect a lot of people from a lot of bad stuff, and took a 70 million anti-spam company into a multi-billion-dollar security company. But it also meant that, back to the earlier conversation, it also meant that we had to completely change our go-to-market, because we had to go from selling to IT messaging people to selling to the chief information security officer, the CISO. And we had none of those skills in the organization. And that was a completely different selling motion. And so, again, that's an area where you've got to align product with go-to-market. Because if we tried to do the old go-to-market play with the new product capabilities, it would have failed completely, because the messaging people weren't interested in that advanced threat capability. It's part of why they told me they wouldn't pay for it.
Right. Now the dots are connecting for me of when you started, really brainstorming about Avarra. I bet that transition period, when you now have all of these sellers who are used to selling a very particular product, a very particular motion to a particular buyer, you now have to train and enable an entirely new motion. And I imagine there was turnover. I'm sure some couldn't adapt. You probably had to invest a ton of training and time and resources into enablement. Yet,
Yeah, and sometimes it was the best, most trusted reps who didn't engage, because they built trust and relationship, and they were comfortable selling the old thing. The new thing, they didn't understand. They hadn't had the at bat, so they didn't want to talk about it, because they didn't want to look uninformed in front of these customers that they'd spent years developing relationships with. So we got very spotty uptake, where some regions got the new thing and were run with it, and other regions, no progress at all. Right. And that's very typical of new product rollouts in any organization. And as we continue to expand our product line at Proofpoint, we went from this one advanced threat product to multiple. And every time we did it, we had the same problem, which is, how do I get people to engage in something new? If they're making money selling the old thing, then they don't want to go back to being new. Why should they waste their time? And then that leaves the opportunity for focused point competitors who sell only that to win in that space. And I see this repeatedly in large organizations, where they fail to compete against a smaller competitor that is laser focused with a point solution, simply because they can't get their field to engage in this new thing. And so they end up creating overlay teams. They end up, product specialists having the 12-legged sales call, where they bring the bus to the meeting because no one can talk to anything other than their one little narrow thing. And this all goes back to, well, they don't have any opportunity to get enough at-bats. And if you don't get the at-bats, you're not going to be comfortable with that material. So you got to bring along the specialist who gets at-bats every day. Well, with Avarra, we can change that. We can give everybody it.
Yeah. Yeah. And hence the cycle of bundling and unbundling and software happens again and again and again, because we're leaving these room for these new entrants who can just frankly define the pain better, because we haven't, given our folks the ability to get the at-bats to define the pain the best. I love it. All right, switching gears. We always have a section on this podcast where we actually have listeners send in questions. Thank you for always sending in great questions. It makes it easy that we get so many, because I can find one that I think will be perfect for this conversation. And the question is, this feels like a problem most people can identify with. Question was from a founder. It says, "It seems like there's always friction between what my sellers are promising and how quickly product can actually ship new features. Any suggestions on how to fix this problem?"
Yeah, there are a number of approaches. It depends a lot on your stage. If you're slightly further along, the best approach is to simply align motivations with your sales team. So if you promise feature features, then that deal, you can't recognize the revenue because you have future deliverables. So all the revenue gets deferred. And if you pay your reps only on recognizable revenue, then they'll get paid when that feature gets delivered. And then that aligns interests. If the rep really needs it to close the business, which you want, if it's really required to close the business, you want to close the business, well, they'll take okay, I get paid 3 months from now. That's fine because they're going to get zero otherwise. If they can close the deal without that feature, then they're going to close the deal now. And as a public, larger company, it's a really easy card to play because you've got revenue recognition rules, et cetera. And when you explain this to reps who have never experienced this before, you'd be amazed at the number of deals that get done without that feature commitment. It's a little harder earlier stage because sometimes as a founder, I want to take that deal. And I appreciate the fact that my rep brought me that deal. And I want to reward them for having me brought that deal. So you could make exceptions if you decide you want to. But as a policy, that really crisps things up in my experience.
Yeah, I like it. I like the straightforward, somewhat simple answer, at least for larger company. Little nuanced, sounds like for earlier stage. And so I guess your advice then for earlier stage founders is you kind of have to do it on a case by case
Well, make that your
basis.
policy so that at least they
Right.
know. And
Yeah.
then if we decide you're going to do it anyway, well, then you've given the rep something, right? And so they feel like they're getting something. And so that's probably going to engender goodwill.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. All right. This brings us to our final two questions. They're usually my favorite two questions to ask. And thank you for this discussion. This has been super, super cool. And I'm so happy we decided to do this and get a product lens into this go-to-market conversation because it's so important. And these final two questions, I keep them intentionally vague. You can take them anywhere you want. And the first question is, what is one tactic or strategy that go-to-market leaders believe to be true that you think is bullshit or at least no longer serving us?
Sure. I'm going to give you two on this one. One, because one's Avarra related and then the other's not. The Avarra related one, just very quickly, is if you're thinking of your ramp time in terms of time, whether it's rolling out a product or training a rep, that's bullshit because your reps are not fine wine or cheese. They don't get better with time. Like time has nothing to do with it, right? They get better with at bats and how much they learn from every at bat. And so if they can get more at bats and learn more, either because they're getting direct feedback from their manager, et cetera, they're going to learn faster. Deal cycle time matters too. If you're going into a completely cold territory and you've got a 6-month sales cycle, that's also going to impact your ramp time. But in general, why do our SDRs or inside folks ramp more quickly? They're new. They don't know anything about sales. How do they ramp more quickly? Because they get at bats every day and they're likely in the office and they're getting coaching on each one of those at bats. Your enterprise rep who's got 20 accounts, like how do they get enough at bats? That's why it takes them longer. So stop thinking about it in terms of time and think about it in terms of at bats and feedback, how much I'm learning from each at bat.
I want to underscore that one because I think that's a brilliant, great takeaway. I think it's just standard practice that you pick a somewhat arbitrary number, or it's based on some sort of historical data points that it takes 6 months for a mid-market rep to get ramped, and it takes 9 months for a enterprise AE to get ramped. But that's the total wrong way to look at it. It's like, how many discovery calls did they do? How many demos did they do? How many deal cycles did they get through in this situation? How many simulations could they get through? That is a much higher indicator of them being truly ramped than just arbitrary time.
And your point is, it's not only that first call, it's like they have to get ramped through the entire sales cycle, right? And that's really hard if I'm failing. Think of it, if I could only learn to play golf on the course and I had no driving range, I had no putting green, I had no short game, and I only could learn on the course, and every time I got a double bogey or worse, my round was over, right? That's what we're asking our reps to do today, right? It's really expensive and takes a really long time for each one of these at bats. And if I mess up on the first hole, I'm done. And I think if we can give people a driving range and a putting green, then they're going to learn a whole lot quicker. Now, are there subtleties that I can't do and I'm only going to learn out on the course? Absolutely. But I'm going to learn a whole lot faster, particularly if I've got a coach there on the driving range with a video monitor, and providing me feedback as opposed to me out by myself on the course.
I love that. And you had a second
I had
one
a
as
second
well.
one that I think, because I didn't want to be only doing Avarra related things. The other one I think really people need to stop thinking about as a general purpose tool is their sales funnel. Sales funnel is useful as a forecasting tool, but other than that, I think it's really counterproductive for two reasons. One, it eliminates everybody who falls out of that funnel as if like they're gone, but they may have never been qualified and may still be out there and just not progress to the next point of the funnel. Or they may be proceeding through the rest of that funnel with your competition. And by focusing on the funnel, I've got this sample bias where I'm only looking at the people who come through. Well, I really need to know about all of those people. And the second equally big reason what's the problem is I almost always define the steps in that sales funnel from my perspective. Like, have I gotten the technical win, or are they qualified, or any of those things? We should really be thinking this as a buyer's journey. You should be thinking of each of those steps, not from your perspective, but from the buyer's perspective. What do they need to know to move through their path to purchase? And if you define it as a buyer's journey, not a sales funnel, it focuses you on what do I have to do to actually progress that from the customer standpoint. And that is way more powerful in terms of understanding what do I need to do to improve conversion rates between the steps, as opposed to just looking at the numbers. And it also forces you to find ways to figure out what happened to all the people who are still on that journey, but just not on the journey with me. One of the advantages we had at Proofpoint was everybody's mail server has what's called an MX record, which tells the internet where to find it. And by inspecting that, we were able to build a tool to figure out what hosted email security product someone was using. And when we saw a customer move from one to another, well, we knew that they'd gone to the competition. And then we could go back and figure out, well, did we ever engage with them? Where did they fall out of the sales cycle? We had big accounts that would buy the competition that maybe only engaged with us at the top of the funnel and disappeared forever. That's incredibly valuable data. And I encourage all of your GTM leaders, you're not always going to have that luxury, but there are ways that you can do this. What are the customer success stories or other ways that you know that someone has bought the competition, and then figure out, did I ever engage with them? Where did they fall out in my buyer's journey? Because that's what you need to understand if you want to improve your conversion.
Yeah. Really, really fantastic call out there. And leads to the final question, which is, I call it the silver bullet question. What is one tactic or strategy that is working for you right now at Avarra? I know you're early in this journey, but anything you could share with early stage founders that's working?
Well, for us, and I talked about first meetings being gold, we're actually, for qualified prospects, we're actually building a simulation like the one that you ran that's specific to the customer. So we're creating just based on public information, simulation we can run in the first meeting that they can talk to, where we're simulating one of their buyers. And of course, we get it wrong because we don't know who their buyers are. We don't know what their best practice is. But it's way more real if they get to interact with something that's relevant to them and their business than if it was a generic demo of an Avarra scenario, for instance. And so anything that you can do to just like hook that customer in that first meeting to get them to engage with your solution, I think really helps. And this is the tactic we've chosen.
Yeah, it's a great one. And if there's any ways to, build in that contextual part of a demo environment is just going to breathe so much more life into it when you do get a chance to showcase your product, particularly in this environment where getting to that first meeting is more difficult than ever, So when you do get your buyer on there, make sure that you've done everything in your power. And there is now so much publicly available data that you can make some assumptions. And again, you called out, they can be wrong assumptions, but even then it's going to be a learning opportunity for
It's going to be a learning opportunity. So if you don't know them, well, you might have a peer of theirs that's one of your customers. There's lots of ways you can do this to make it relevant to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, David, this has been an incredibly fun conversation. I know it's informative when I leave with my own page of notes right here. So thanks for spending the time to jump on with our listeners. If folks are interested in Avarra, they're probably like, this is the coolest thing. How can people, check it out, interact with it, see what a simulation environment could look like in their organization?
Yeah, the easiest way is Avarra.ai. And that's AVARR, two A's, .ai, and some basic product information there. And really what we'd love is to do that customized demo for you that I just talked about. And so go there, request a demo, and we'd love to show it to you.
I love it. I would highly recommend any listeners go play around with it. It's wild, and I'm gonna go make sure I get this AI avatar guest on the next time I pitch him. So, David, thanks again, and for all our listeners, I say it every week, but listening's one thing, executing something totally different. Hopefully, we gave you some ideas, tactics, strategies to take into your own organization and help you grow. And we will see you all next week.